Okay, so thank you for joining us as the part of our open evening for the BA Music Performance and Industry. We are joined by some brilliant panelists today to talk about the music industry and what it means to be studying for a career in the music industry as it is now in 2020 and how that might be changing over the coming years. To introduce our panelists, we have in alphabetical order Moses Boyd. Moses Boyd studied drums at Trinity Laban in the jazz department. He's described in The Guardian as a producer, composer, collaborator, influencer, not bound by the kit surrounding him, a progenitor of the current London jazz scene. These early years of Moses' career have seen him win multiple awards, including 2 MOBOs, play with Sampha and Sons of Kemet, among many more, produce for Little Simz, collaborate under Moses Boyd Exodus and Exodus Records, and release solo album Dark Matter to wide acclaim early this year. His work defies genre, and as an artist, he cannot be categorised. Sahra Gure also joins us since graduating from Trinity Laban in 2019, where she was among the winners of the inaugural TL Innovation Awards. Sahra has carved out a secure place for herself in the UK music scene, releasing debut EP Love Me With Me last autumn. She has performed at London Jazz Festival, Havana Jazz Festival, Queen Elizabeth Hall, Ronnie Scott's Dimensions and WOMAD. Sahra has been decisive in her path. Firmly the author of her own work, she says, "There is a wonderful power in ownership, especially when it comes to music and art. No person or label is going to take the risks you would for yourself." Eric Karsenty also joins us. He is a music marketing consultant and artist manager and founder of Bridge the Gap. Eric has more than 18 years experience delivering successful global programs, partnerships and campaigns for multinationals in music and consumer electronics, and most often has been seen at the cutting edge of industry development. Previous roles include head of music at BlackBerry and head of brand activation at Sonos. His focus is on developing artists to improve their understanding of the music industry. In his own words, "My life revolves around music, from playing piano at the age of 4 to raising my kids in the most eclectic music environment possible today." And finally, but by no means least important, is Kevin Legendre. Kevin Legendre is a journalist, broadcaster and writer with an established interest in Black music. Deputy editor of Echoes, he contributes to a wide range of publications that include Jazzwise, Music Week, Vibrations and The Independent. He teaches jazz history at Trinity Laban. And his latest book, Hear My Trainer Comin', is about Jimi Hendrix, where he looks beyond the superstar guitarist and drug-taking psychedelic icon to focus on the storyteller and songwriter who alchemized word and sound. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to kick off by asking, what does a prospective student to this course need to understand about the industry that you're all part of?
If I was talking to a student now, a prospective student, I think it's important to understand the different avenues. I think when I started getting into music, I didn't start with the headspace as a profession and fully aware of all the different avenues involved. So, you know, my love for the drums led me to becoming a musician. But looking back and seeing the different avenues I wasn't even aware of at the time that I've been able to, you know, go through certain doors, whether it's producing, ghostwriting, copying, arranging, writing, MDing, production, building shows, mixing, engineering, you know, and the list goes on. So I think to sort of prospective students, I would say, obviously what you enter in, whether you're a guitarist, singer, writer, I think is important to understand. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't have to end there, really. I think we need to sort of look more holistically nowadays, because there's so many opportunities and there's so many different innovations that have happened since I was studying, that you don't just have to see yourself as a drummer or a DJ or a producer or whatever. You know, the music industry has so many different corners and avenues. You know, I think everybody is more multifaceted than they might think going into a course.
Also just try things. I think it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm a singer and that's what I do, and I don't know how to produce or I don't know how to arrange. But I think, like Moses said, if you try stuff, you start to realize that it's easier than you think, and B, like there's so many possibilities, you know, but both like financially and musically.
And as far as I'm concerned, just one more thing is I do work with a lot of young artists, and what I'm trying to tell them is they're more than their whatever activity they do. So if they're a guitarist or singer or bassist, they have to tell their own story, because in a world where there's so much music out there on a weekly basis, they can't just base their success or their career on their music. And, you know, we've got two great examples here who have told their story, who have told what they're really doing and what they believe in as individuals, beyond the sole fact that they play drums or they sing. And that's also by doing all the stuff they do, but they come with a very strong story to tell as individuals. And that's going to make a difference, especially in the future.
The other thing as well, just to round off, which I think is important, is this idea of a time frame, patience, growth and development. Not saying to yourself, okay, I'll give myself 5 years to quote unquote make it. That's something that I've heard so many times over the years in my work as a journalist, encountering various people, various actors in the music industry, at all these different levels. It's like, okay, so and so has to be here within this particular time frame, and if they haven't made it after 5 years or 7 years or however long it may be, then in the worst case scenario, they're consigned to history. They end up on the scrap heap. And I've encountered a lot of very, very talented artists who've been damaged by those restrictions. And I think the idea of the quote unquote slow burn, even though I'm not recommending it, because I think that people should be successful to a certain extent as quickly as possible, yet at the same time there shouldn't be too much pressure on people to be successful overnight. So just to hopefully you guys will relate to what I'm saying, but I'll underline that point with one of the great cliches in the music industry, which I think is very, very true, and that is, it takes 25 years to become an overnight sensation.
Thank you, Kevin. I wonder, Moses and Sarah, does that resonate for you? If you're looking back to how you approached your training and your applications for uni or whatever, did you see yourselves then as artists that would be known for being able to not only play or sing brilliantly, but also to produce, to connect with other artists, to write for them, all of the different multifaceted things that you both do? Did that seem possible when you were approaching training?
You know what? It didn't seem as possible as maybe I would say it would now, for me at least. I think I was just a bit hard-headed in a respect. I knew I had those interests, but I think, at least if I compare myself to maybe other people I was around and studying, I could see very clearly not everyone had the same willpower or understanding that the opportunities are around, and you just kind of have to put yourself out a bit more. So I would definitely say it's a lot more democratic nowadays. I mean, and that's to do with technology, it's to do with the way the world has changed. But yeah, I wouldn't say I knew I wanted to do all of these things that I'm doing now. I didn't really have a complete idea, which is why in some ways I'm glad, like what Kevin said, the slow burn. I think it is important to have time to experiment, and time to experiment when not everybody's watching. You know, that's kind of hard nowadays. That's I think it's definitely a lot. I wouldn't say easier. It's more accessible nowadays than it was, and I think that idea of having a multidisciplinary artist is a lot more of a thing, I think. Whereas like the people I was around, it felt like a lot more of a graft where, you know, there wasn't courses, there wasn't YouTube in the same way. There wasn't a lot of things that, you know, you could easily just people, you know, just even people doing it. You know, you had to kind of get your information from so many different places that I think if you're not that way inclined, it can be really hard, you know.
Yeah, I think for me, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea till about 2-3 years ago, like, what it takes to make a record, or like what's involved, like I had no ideas that you even needed a producer. I didn't even know what producer does. So I think I come from a very, like, I just wanted to sing. I did the jazz course because I like singing, and then I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a singer. I started writing songs, and it's like as I've gone along, I've started to learn about all these other roles that there is. And like I said before, just by trying it, and then by having a great community as well, having people who are like give you recommendations and are willing to share, like that I think has been the most important thing ever since I moved here. Like the amount of help I've had from just my peers in learning about production, learning about arranging, and then even knowing that these are jobs, you know, writing for other people, what's involved in that, like that for me has been huge.
How much of that do you think you picked up because you were in a conservatoire environment, or, you know, what are the aspects of training that supported your journeys in that way? Is it about those connections that you made in the peer groups that you found yourselves in? You both were studying alongside, you know, people that are really making it, or is it that you just had the space and the time? You know, what are your reflections now, looking back on how you were able to support yourselves to be really creative artists?
I think for me, that's like, I think naturally I'm a creative person, but I think in terms of community and the people around me, it was just luck, because I'm not from London. I didn't come through, I don't know about you, Moses, with the Tomorrow's Warriors and that community, what that was like for you, but I didn't have that where I grew up in Norfolk. I grew up in Norwich. Like I didn't have a musical community there in the same way, you know? So then moving to London, it was like, oh my gosh, like everybody's doing all this cool stuff and I had no idea. And it was like, I think it was just lucky that I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I was lucky enough to have really warm and giving people around me.
To echo that, yeah, community has played a big factor, I'd say more so than anything. What I think was interesting about me studying at a conservatoire, and this isn't to put the blame on the course, it's what is interesting is, like, when you go and study, I studied a jazz course, which would be different to what this is about, the course, the popular music course. And in some ways it makes complete sense. They give you, there's almost like these compartments of the course, but they're not sort of trying to make you a popular musician. It's like, okay, there's elements where you can really become a good arranger, or you could be a good ensemble player, or, you know, but it's like to be a well-rounded musician. And it's the onus is then on the person to kind of extrapolate all of that info. But again, going back to like the first question before, I think a lot of people just aren't aware of the different avenues to even see that information as how valuable it was. I think because I kind of started, before I even got to Trinity, I was making beats and producing on my computer. So being a drummer first, I knew how valuable learning piano was. So I was always in there, you know, getting the info I knew I lacked. And I knew down the line it would be useful. But I think, I guess with a course like this, it's a lot more, I think it's good. It's just a lot more focused, and I think people just do need to be aware that the avenues are there. Because I see a lot of talent and a lot of people I studied with that didn't even make it to the end of the course and are doing great things now. I look at them, I'm like, oh, it's just that you didn't really feel you had the right path to follow, to take the skills you do have to put it in this place or to put it in that place, you know? And I think it's good. I think it's good. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily so much to do with the college. I mean, the environment and the community plays a huge part. But I think it's more access and representation and seeing those roles around you in a community, in an industry, so on and so forth, that people can kind of aim to do it. Because I think the music industry can be quite mysterious at times. Music just appears and no one knows who mixed or created this or ghost wrote that or programmed that show, you know what I mean? Until you kind of get plugged into it, you know, you really get to see the back end and what's involved.
Thank you. I wonder if we expand that back out to Eric and Kevin then, bearing in mind that sort of the music industry being mysterious or maybe inaccessible to people that aren't already tapped into it in some way, either through friends, parents, or the environment they grow up in or whatever. What is the music industry? You know, where do people start? What's the road to success look like now for artists?
Well, I guess I've made a whole business around this. So because I could see the need of all the people around me, all musicians and creators who had, you know, a lot of talent and a lot of great content to put out there. But then there's a moment where you've done your thing and you've been like multifaceted and you understand all of that. But then there's there's a gap to bridge, to go to that market and to talk to an audience, understand who your audience is. There's plenty of people listening to music, and you have to understand who they are, how to talk to them, and also like technically what are the avenues to distribute music. Like a lot of people who come to me, they're not even aware that you need to distribute your music through a distributor, and then you don't need to have a label. All of that, understanding that the dynamic and the ecosystem of the music industry, which is quite complex and always moving, and it was very different 5 years ago and 8 years ago than it is now, and it'd be very different, very, very different in 5 years' time. So for them, it's about understanding and having all the, it's what we call artist empowerment, having all the tools and knowledge to actually do things by yourself, because you can. And again, we have two great examples here. You don't need a label. You don't need, in fact, you don't even need a manager at first. You just need to understand how this ecosystem works, and then do your thing and get out there, because you have all the channels, the social, the digital channels, etc. You can talk to an audience. If you know where they are, you can create that relationship with an audience, which you could not do 10 years ago or even 8 years ago. So that's pretty much, the takeaway for me is you have the tools, but you need to understand how this market works and to navigate it.
Can I jump in and just say, I think on the lines of that is also like ask. I think for me that was like, I just would watch things happening and I'd be like, I don't know how that happens and how that happens. And as soon as I start asking people for advice, like it's so easy. You ask someone, oh, how do I do this? And suddenly you have all this knowledge and you're not relying on, like you said, you're not relying on anyone else. Like, yeah, you don't need a label, but you do need a solid community, or, that's where this course would probably be great, because you'd have people that you can ask who aren't exploiting you or could be exploiting you along the line, so like I think that's really important, is to ask and find the people around you that you can ask as well.
I think musicians oftentimes overlook their unique selling point, that they are musicians. The amount of times I've been able to get into rooms and places because I'm a musician is like this weird passport that no one else can have, where you can get into a sound check and see your hero, you can get into this festival, you can get into this room just because you've got a trumpet on your back or wherever. So even if your end goal isn't to be the best saxophone player or whatever, what I kind of found looking back on my career is I started as a session drummer, and I remember being in sessions, and I remember walking in on a session and Tony Platt was engineering, and I'm like, Tony Platt, I remember seeing his name on Bob Marley, and I was like, did a bit of Google. I get to the session the next day, I'm asking Tony a million questions. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's got a lot of information.
I wonder, based on that, if you'd all talk briefly about who your influences are in that way.
I'd say for me, primarily, it would be Gary Crosby and Janine Irons with Tomorrow's Warriors, that organization, but also people like Kevin Haynes, who's a great saxophone player, and Bata, Bata percussionist, Jazz Refreshed, and that whole, I don't have as much as like with people like Kaidi or Digo, I don't have as much as a relationship with them, but musically, they're people I've looked up to and learned a lot from, for sure, and greatly respect. But like what Kevin was saying, I think there is that magical thing, particularly in jazz, but it's music generally, where there is that generational, intergenerational exchange that I don't see it as much in the other arts. I've got a brother that makes clothes, and I've got a lot of artist friends, and I don't see the same sort of warmth and community in the same way we have it as musicians. So yeah, if I can't even begin to list all of the people and musicians that I've met at jam sessions, like Wynton Marsalis, Branford, Pharaoh Sanders, McCoy, like I've met so many that even if it's for like a minute or an hour that they've given me their time, it was really important, and I gained something from it that made me grow as a musician. And it just goes back to what I was saying with that musician passport thing, that it can get you into places where you can really expand and learn from people that are older than you and kind of make you level up in a way that you weren't before. So yeah, I've had many. I can't even begin to to list. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of it as like it should be an apprenticeship. I always think that like you should be assigned a couple of mentors, and that's how you should learn. Because I think for me, like I'd say Orphy Robinson and Cleveland Watkiss were huge in helping me, especially Cleveland actually, who had quite a tough time in the music industry and was super supportive in educating me on what even a record deal was. I didn't even really realize what it was. I could very easily have just been like, yeah, great. But to have people like that around to really like break it down to you, like it's essentially a loan, or, you know, to tell you these things is super important. I played a long time with Dele Sasimi, who's been like an uncle, a father figure to me as well, and has taken me to many places where I've met, again, like Moses said, incredible musicians. Like, you know, like he said, being a session musician, which you can do as a singer as well. You can do backing vocals. You don't have to start off doing your own thing. I think that's like, for singers, it always seems to be like, so do you write, and what do you write, and where's your songs? And it's like, I don't even know what anything is yet, you know. So I think, like, especially as singers, like, you can still do that, and I think that is really important to do that as well.
I think it's super valuable to them, and you know, if it's part of a course, either on a one-to-one basis or within a group, on any level, like, you know, from a musical point of view, but business point of view, anything that we've just touched on today, having that voice that have a bit of experience and it can shape up ideas and you know, direction for those is so valuable for them. And every time I've done it and I do it, I really see the benefits for these people. And it's not about like too much of like providing knowledge, but just like giving like real life examples and insights on how things work, like a record deal, or like, you know, distribution, or like actually to go and record, you're going to need to do a mix and a mastering. And, you know, a lot of these people, they have no clue about this, and how to promote themselves and how to leverage their, you know, social media channels, etc., in the best way possible. Having an idea, having a plan, almost like a strategic vision of where you want to go, as opposed to just think about tomorrow. And the mentoring is very variable in that way.
I also think like artists, like recommendation as well is really important, to have like these characters who believe in you and are established and can recommend you and bring you into spaces that you probably wouldn't be in if you were on your own. I think that's, again, like that amazing thing that comes with having older role models or being able to play in bands with more established artists, is you get to be in spaces you wouldn't be, and they also, I mean, a good mentor makes space for you and lets you showcase yourself within what they're doing, which I think is really important.
Kevin, who are your influencers?
Anybody who gave me work. I'm being serious. As a working journalist and broadcaster, that was it. It was a question of finding work, and to be slightly less irreverent. I think people who believed in me, who saw that I had potential when I hadn't proved myself, when I was just starting out, and because I fell into journalism. I didn't train to be a journalist. I didn't have credentials. So I think I was very, very fortunate to meet people who, again, there's a parallel with the musician, people who were open-minded, people who were able to see beyond the obvious, people who wouldn't say to me, well, you don't have all of these credits, you don't have a long CV, but maybe you can do interesting things. And I think the people who really influenced me were obviously people who'd already proved themselves in the media world, and musicians as well. So all roads lead to Gary Crosby to a certain extent. Gary Crosby and June Records and Janine, they gave me my very first sleeve note commission, which was Dennis Baptiste's debut album. And that was very important for me, not just because of the additional profile it gave me, but in terms of my confidence and growth. So I think those people who who open doors for you, but more to the point, the people who open doors for you when they're under no obligation to do so. When you're not an obvious talent or an obvious high achiever. I think if I've achieved anything at all, it's through hard work and just really showing a lot of tenacity and hopefully some talent as well. But the people who are willing to believe in you when maybe there's not that much to believe in, people who are willing to take chances, people who are willing to take a risk.
From that very inspiring place, I'm going to take it down a realer route now. And that's around how artists can balance creativity and performance and music making with the practical and business side of things. I feel like, Eric, this is your specialism, but all of you have a lot to say on this, I know. How do artists negotiate ownership in 2020?
You want to go first, Eric?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, well, I mean, that's what I try to do my best every day. But I guess, you know, from a general point of view, today more than ever, almost, like as we were touching on earlier, you have everything at your disposal to be able to be the musician and the artist, the creator that you want to be, but also having, you know, the knowledge of everything that is around you, the market, the audience, what other channels that you can use to go to your to, you know, release your music, etc. However, as we also said, some artists need a lot of support, so that's, you know, building a team, but that also comes from a bit, you know, the place of knowledge. If you understand how this market works and you know where you have your strong points and your weakest points, then maybe you're going to think, okay, I need a manager, or I do need a label because I really can't do without a label, or I need a lawyer because I'm going to doing a lot of sync and a lot of like publishing, etc. I have no idea how this works. So again, for me, it's all about coming from the point of knowledge and understanding on how to navigate this world, and either saying, you know, like Moses did really well, like, actually, I'm going to own this, and I'm going to be a drummer and a producer, and I'm also going to be a label and do all of that. Or understanding where you're good when you're not as good, and having a team to enable you to do your art and to create in the best way possible. And that's where, you know, a lot of new roles come in this market, in this industry: the label services, the management services, consultants, and people who are here to support artists where they need to be supported, and publishers and, you know, lawyers in a way as well. But like stepping back from this old industry where there's a creator, there's a label, and there's the audience. There's so many more roles now that you can actually have access to. It just depends where you know, how you want to do it. But again, and I'll repeat myself, but it comes from understanding how this market works.
Very true. And to sort of echo Kevin's point earlier as well, like, he's right, not every artist is the same, and there are some artists that will lean more to having a team around them. And, you know, as much as I like to do stuff myself, I'm the first to say I'm not anti working with labels and other people. I think my path naturally kind of led me this way. And again, I go back to what I was talking about with like being a musician. And really, to be honest, being a musician kind of taught me so much of the ecosystem of the music industry. You know, when I was getting booked to play people's gigs, whether it was in a pub, whether it was in, I don't know, a gallery, whether it was a festival, and understanding the different dynamics of how money circulates, because that's a reality. You know, we all have bills. So understanding how money is made and how you're getting paid at the end of the night is kind of a very easy way to get into being, how does this system work? If I do this gig for this person, how much am I making? And then when you start to ask more questions, it's like, okay, well, if there's this many seats, how much does the gig go up by? And where are the cuts? Who's taking? And then when you start to ask more questions, you start to get a better picture of the different players and the roles, whether it's like a promoter, whether it's like a marketer, whether it's like at the bar, whether it's the venue, whether it's, you know, whether they've hired the venue, whether the venue themselves have offered. And, you know, that's when being a musician and going through the cycle just on a performance basis, you can get an idea of what the ecosystem. And I would sort of challenge, as much as I think, yeah, there are artists that will always need help, I think even if every artist and creative puts out one track on their own, and I mean from idea to mastering to product, just to see how it works, because if you learn the side as a musician of how the ecosystem works for a touring performance base, that's a big part of the music industry, especially nowadays. But then the other side, obviously, with the publishing and the physicals and the actual distribution of the music, I think once you kind of get a good idea of how the two work together, even if then you do go to partner with a label, manager, label services, it gives you a much better understanding of where you stand.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, you couldn't have said it better. I guess we're talking the same language in terms of understanding the ecosystem. But when people come to me and they're like, oh, I've got this great album, I need a label, my first comment to them is just get a single out by yourself. Let's do it together through my distributor, understanding, and, you know, we'll show you how it works. And you go through all these stages, as Moses said. And then you know, it gives you give it a go, you understand how this works. And B, if you go to a label later on saying, actually, I've released this thing on my own, it got to 50,000 streams on Spotify, I got a tour out of that, I sold merch, and you've got you in such a better position to actually negotiate anything later on. A publishing deal, a record deal, if that's what you want, some more gigs, anything, some collaborators to go on your next record, because you've shown that you actually can do it by yourself, as opposed to, again, going back to, I'm the creator, you do the rest for me. That's not how it works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sarah, how does this match your experience? Because you have self-released and recently, in the last few weeks, even another single.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it better than Moses has said it already. I mean, I think education just gives you, knowledge is power. Like, the more you know yourself, the more you can ask the right questions, the more you can, you know, I released everything, my EP on my own, but I now have a manager, because I know that I have certain things that I can't do as well, and there's certain emails that I don't want to write. I'm not good at selling myself, I'm not good at promoting myself, and therefore I have someone else who can help me with that. But I think, you know, like they said, do it on your own, learn as much as you can, and then find the bits that you find hard. Instead of jumping to a label and taking the whole package, just, you know, see what comes with it, see what you need.
To add to that as well, just remembering who's listening to this. Let's say you go through all of those channels and you decide, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this for myself. There's still the option to do it for somebody else. Do you see what I mean? Like, that's something I didn't think about when I was getting into music.
So we're in an era of what feels like quite a seismic shift at the moment. We've got political shifts, good and bad. We have all been locked in our houses for 4 months at the time of recording. Locked is maybe a bit strong. There are so many shifts happening, and the music industry is also beset, as it has been for the last 30 years, particularly with technological shift, and your toolkits are shifting all the time. The way that you sell yourself is shifting all the time. So I'm interested in what the shifts are that are changing each of you and your work in terms of the musical landscape.
So from my point of view, there are two main points in terms of the massive shift in the last, not even 30 years, in the last 10 years, if you want. And one of them we have to talk about it is streaming. The fact that streaming is, you know, unfortunately for some or fortunately for others, sort of ruling the world in the bigger market. Some indie artists or labels manage to, you know, be successful without it, but as a general rule, streaming is sort of ruling the world of music globally. And we are in a position where a marketing plan 10 years ago, or the approach from an artist 10 years ago, would have been completely different from what it is today, because you have to take this into account, that, you know, in order to be somehow successful, you need to get playlisted in you know, Spotify owned or Apple Music owned playlist, editorial playlists, etc. But the problem is that you know, it turns out that hearing a lot of music doesn't mean discovering music, and that's what they call the lean back experience in the world of streaming, where you hear a lot of music because you're being served music, but then you don't discover it. And and that's why the importance of the narrative and the storytelling for artists, and having really something to say beyond the music, as I was commenting on earlier, is crucial. Because today, if even if you land a playlist, as we call it in the jargon, but then people don't really interact with this because there's no story behind, then it's going to be, you know, for X amount of weeks, you're going to get a lot of streams, and that's it. It's not going to take your career or your story or you as an artist any further. And that's why you know, if you look at Spotify data, because this is the biggest streamer, you look at what's going on, and some artists have landed playlists where they have a track at 2, 3, 4 million streams, and then the rest of the catalog is, you know, under 10,000 or even under 5,000. And it means that there's no relation between, or correlation between that success. They haven't really, you know, triggered it, because they don't have enough story to tell behind it and enough tools to leverage this. So streaming is super important, but you need to know how to leverage it in the best way possible. And the second point for me in the future is what we call fandom, and how to create a direct relationship with your fans, and is directly, you know, impacted with COVID. You have seen, and I'm sure the guys will talk about this in further details, but we have seen a shift even on platforms where something like Twitch, which is a video game focused platform, has become a big platform for music during this time, because they have tools and features that allow that direct relationship with artists. So a lot of artists are now doing live streams, or, you know, like courses or discussions with their fans through a platform like Twitch, or something like Patreon, where you create content specifically for an audience against, you know, a bit of money, and you create that relationship. The platform is there for you to do that. And because of the ability to do this now, being, you know, always in the house and locked in, you're going to see a lot of shift between now and like the next 5 years onto platforms like Patreon and Twitch and more, to create that relationship and that direct, you know, engagement with artists without anyone in the middle.
I think the shift in terms of the way people are distributing, whether it's their performances, whether it's their music, whether it's their talks, whatever, I think is changing to become more direct, and I think more localized. So you're not trying to get 1 million fans, you're trying to get 1,000 core super fans, which you could, you know, is fine. You can sustain a career off that, as opposed to trying to be the Beyoncés. And, you know, I don't want that personally, but, you know, I think a lot of people think that's the only way, I suppose, to be successful, to have a huge fan base, to have a huge amount of numbers, to have huge streaming numbers, to have huge followers on Twitter, Instagram, where it's not the case. You know, I've got a lot of friends that are artists that are touring, and if you were to go on their YouTube channel, you'd be like, what? How? You know, no one's watching your videos. But it's not an accurate representation, because, again, unless you buy into the Facebooks or the Googles, you know, nowadays the algorithms don't work in your favor. So I hope there's more of a shift off them platforms into a more direct relationship. And I would say the last point, I hope I can be a part of the wave, but I feel within the next 10 years, coding is going to, you know, my little sisters have learned how to code, and, you know, I'm sure my nephew, who's 4 years old, will grow up knowing how to code. So I think the landscape in terms of how artists or just people generally are more savvy with creating their own content, I think is going to become even more interesting, as, like, you know, you're going to find artists that play guitar and code and have made their own app and made their own visual world that they can, you know. So I think that's going to be an interesting player in terms of how the music shifts, how the dynamic shift, whether it's distribution, whether it's like communication. I think we haven't even begun to see the advancements that are coming.
Kevin and Sarah, what about your shifts?
Well, I think the idea of story that Eric mentioned, something very personal, something which frames and underpins the music, which enables people to relate to you as a human being, as well as a musician. I think it's always been there, but it could be even more important now, primarily because we're just flooded with so much music. So what's going to stand out? You know, the things which come across as music that had to be made because people had to tell those stories, because those stories were personal and universal. So I think the idea of story is a crucial one. You know, what goes around the music? What is the world that this person is allowing the listener into? What is the mind that the musician has that he or she might allow the listener into as well? It's incredibly powerful when you hear a musician tell a personal story.
I would say, I guess, more on a social level, I guess a good big shift is representation, and, you know, who's making the music and how they look and what communities they're from is having a big shift as well. So I think it's becoming more diverse. Sahra maybe could talk better than I can, but there's more women, you know, like there's more, you know, I've been lucky to work with a lot of them. And even just in the last 5 years, you know, working with a lot of female band leaders, Zara, Nubaya, Sarah Tandy, it's becoming, at least here in London, and hopefully, no, actually even more around the world is happening in my experience. So I think that is going to have its own beautiful shift.
I think, like you said, representation is so important, and I think the main bit I've seen a shift in is seeing women in roles outside of music as well. So to have my managers a woman, to have A&Rs who are women, to have you know, people who have labels who are women, DJs. I mean, that, I think, like there's a comfort zone, isn't there, of having people who are like you around you. So just to have women in those spaces, I think instantly makes me as a woman feel more at ease, and often I'm able to express myself better to women. I mean, that's a whole nother history that's under that, but it's so nice to see, like Mo said, to see women in these roles. And I think if we're going to go down talking about being a woman in this industry, I think that's where, you know, the knowledge is power comes in even more, because it's so important just to know, even if you don't want to do it, even if you don't want to, if you just want to sing and you don't even want to write your songs, and that's entirely up to you. But I think just know where things come from, and really think about what you want to do. I think if I had to speak to myself 5 years ago, I'd be like, don't rush, don't copy what anyone else is doing, and really take time to figure out what you like. Because I think, like we said about having a story and finding your own sound, it's so obvious when you are trying to replicate something, especially if you have something that's so unique to you. You know, you have to believe in yourself and follow, you know, what you want to say and say what you want to say. And it's, you know, it gets hard, especially if you see, I think as a woman as well, like as a mixed race woman that sings sort of soul-y, jazzy pop, you know, it's very easy to become the package. It's really, like, you know, and there's a way that you could try really hard to copy it and it might work, but there's definitely a part of you that's going to suffer, and it's going to come across as ingenuine. So I think that is, for me, the most important part, is to take your time.
I want to pick up on genre now in terms of shift, because I think for me, I'm not a musician, and while I work for TL. My background is more broad across the arts and not specifically music. But what I'm noticing as a consumer of music is a much freer sense of genre. Is there something in music making in 2020 that is throwing genre out the window?
Yeah, I think there's so many different factors. Like, I think socially we are a lot more blurred lines, if that's the correct way. I'm not even sure what the correct way to say it is, but as a society, we're not as compartmental, you know? But as I've grown, it's not just music I feel is like that anymore. It's like fashion, it's art, it's everything. It's all culture, food that is no longer just what I remember growing up, just very compartmentalized. So I think that has a big part to play, not just because of music. And I think technology, growing up and watching your Instagram, your SoundCloud, your Spotify, MySpace, all of these technologies kind of leading us to a point where people can adopt more of a fluid listening palette. We have this moment now where it's not strange that I see 18, 16, 15-year-olds as well as 60-year-olds and everything in between at festivals, and seeing lineups reflect that as well. You know, Field Day a couple of years back, or Dimensions, or Outlook, and these things. Like, I think people are a lot more nuanced than maybe the media have given people opportunity to be. So I think it's not, to me, it's not strange, because I know what happens when you get somebody that's just open and into anything and put them in front of good music. They're going to like it. So I think a lot of time it was more the access and the way people were reaching and absorbing music that needed to be changed. And I think because of all the factors I mentioned, technology, society changing, TV, representation, we're at this very interesting point. I can't fully even explain 100% sure why, but it's definitely happening.
Kevin, I wonder if you have any thoughts here, because your career has spanned generations, and you've drilled down into the lives of, you know, seminal artists like Jimi Hendrix, and I wonder if you perceive a genre shift as well, or whether we're in a new cycle.
I think there's an openness, which is something that we should be very, very grateful for. I think the fact that you have listeners who are willing to accept a wider range of genres. And certainly I remember when I was growing up, where you talk about that dichotomy between indie and hip hop. Well, we had that between soul and rock, where you were soul boy or where you into rock. Unfortunately, it was very racialized as well. Did you listen to black music, or did you listen to mainstream rock? That kind of thing, which is something that we really don't want to go back to. So I think the idea that now it's acceptable for people to like a range of genres, and that there isn't that pressure to be tribal and to be so concerned, so hung up with cults, as it were, and to say, right, okay, this is the tribe, and this is the only thing that I can listen to, and anything outside is going to be automatically rejected just as a matter of course. So this is definitely a good thing. The note of caution that I'd sound is that I think that within every genre, there's still marginalization within the genre itself. There are people within jazz, or within hip-hop, or within rock, or any genre that you care to mention, who are still struggling to be heard. So I think we need to be aware of the constant need to create space everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that a lot has been said, and everything's valid. I mean, if I take my own experience, I work with people that are rooted in jazz, I guess, jazz and soul and hip hop, but the experience is, you know, they are allowed now to say I've been like influenced by all these genres, all these artists, but I am a classically trained jazz musician, and I'm blending this all together. You know, there's always been this concept of fusion, and you know, a lot of the time it's been some, you know, negative, like it's a bit of a patchwork of everything, but it's nothing. But this day and age now, because you have access, as Moses said, to so much music in different genres, and you can actually say what telling your story, like these are my influences and that's what I'm blending all together, and then I add my own touch to it. However, the only problem we have in this market as well from a business point of view is that if you go to a Spotify submission for playlist, or to your distributor or even record stores, they still have very, very rigid compartments in terms of genres. So you're like, I work with people who every time I'm uploading something on a platform, on a portal, I'm like, oh God, what do I choose again? Because there's jazz and then jazz fusion and bebop, and you're like, yeah, but you have to evolve with what's going on. I guess that the genres, there's no more genres, or they're very much like blurred. However, the system still works on those very rigid genres.
I also think like the genre also just depends on who you ask as well. Like if you asked some of the jazz teachers at Trinity if my music was jazz, they'd probably argue it was pop. It's kind of like, like you said, like the lines are so blurred. I think I'm probably the youngest here. I grew up like not thinking about genres at all. And the way that a lot of people around me got into like the jazz world was through samples as well. So, like Jay Dilla and who's sampling what, and getting to the source, and then finding out that people are doing that now, I think is just like thrilling for people to it's like, okay, well, if Jay Dilla was into jazz, then jazz must be cool. So like, where's the jazz? Oh, here's it's accessible. Oh wow, you can go here and you can see it. And I think that is also a big part of it. I think for my generation definitely is looking at who sampled what. And
one thing, a great thing I think has happened over the last couple of years is musicians and club culture have found each other again.
Reunification.
Reunification, exactly. And I think for a long time there was a bit of a disconnect. And there's a lot of DJs that have been championing that for a long time. People like Jazz Refresh, Adam, Justin, Giles Peterson, of course, Tony Minviel. The list goes on. But I think over the last couple of years, there's been this really nice symbiosis of musicians making music that DJs love, and DJs supporting music that musicians are currently making, that I'm not sure, I mean, maybe others could speak on, but I don't know when the last time that was happening so in our face was, so it's quite interesting, I would say.
So moving on a little bit then, where do you see opportunity for yourselves and for the industry going forward?
I have this conversation with a good friend of mine, singer friend Ego LMA, who's an amazing singer, and we always talk about like not letting it rule you as well, and just like remembering that music is enjoyable, and yes, there's this business and it's good to be aware and it's good to be tapped in, but it's also really important to not let it take over your whole life, and not to become obsessed with numbers and contacting this person. And I think that's where for us it's helped to have managers, to have someone else who's worried about those things, because it's really hard to be creative and to be honest and to tell a story and to watch all the figures and make sure you're tapped in and everything. It's like, it's really tough to do all of that and to take your time, and it's like, it's a lot. So we always like just champion not being obsessed and not becoming obsessive, and like music is life, but it's also not life. Like, it's okay.
To that, I would say, I mean, I think there are on one side, there's a lot of business opportunities, and I think in time they'll kind of show. I mean, we kind of spoken on them a bit earlier with like, different platforms, etc. But I think one thing I saw, which I haven't seen much people talk about in lockdown, which is quite revolutionary. Soho Radio did and this was early in lockdown. They did the world's first live to disc socially distanced recording session. So the minute I saw, and there was like no latency, no anything. And I don't think it was a thing where they were all sending stuffing at a different time. They were all playing at the same time in different parts of wherever they were in the country. So like for me as someone that creates, I was like, so wait, hang on. I don't know what they did, but I know if they can do it, there's going to be somebody to figure out the mechanics and make it a platform. So I could be sat here in London, maybe jamming with Terrace Martin in LA and somebody else in South Africa. We can cut a record. Because when you're in a studio, it's not much different to doing it online. If somebody's in a room next door, it makes no difference. Yeah, it makes no difference. So I'm like, the fact that we're here now and the technology is catching up, which I'm surprised I haven't seen more people like rant and rave about, because I'm like, this is a game changer. You know, prior to that, everybody would have to send files and do it in your own space. But now, potentially within the next year or so, we could all be like plugged in and having a session virtually. And I don't know, you could be hiring out Sunset Studios or Sunset Sounds in Hollywood for someone to mix it while you're here without having to leave, you know. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening on the creative side as well.
I think the possibility of working beyond borders, of actually having these collaborations around the world. Angel Bat Dawid,
oh yeah,
she recorded her album, I think, on an iPhone at various places around the world. I think realizing that there's actually so much that you can do now on the hoof in circumstances that in days of old would have seemed impossible.
If we are entering a new decade this year, and we have entered a new decade in a way that it's rarely has a decade been entered before. At the end of the 20s, how are we going to define? How are we going to look back at the 20s, the 2020s, and talk about music?
I feel like the way I look at the 80s, in terms of we had so many musically, I'm talking, and fashion and art. It was so interesting because we had MIDI, we had synthesis, we had, you know, multi-track. We had so many things that are fascinating that when you kind of look back, you can kind of almost see the enjoyment people had of just plugging into something new and things changing. I feel it might be similar to that for me personally, even though I wasn't born in the 80s. But when I look at it, I'm like, I completely understand. I completely understand why you did that with that keyboard and did this, because you didn't have it 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And in the same way with, I feel what's coming in a technology sense, I think we're going to see a lot of that. And some music from that will be great, some won't, you know, but that's okay.
For me, like, it's very clear. I actually did some work for the BPI not so long ago about this. But the 2020s are the decade of the creator for me, without doubt. Sorry, there's a motorbike. But decade of the creator. So because they're going to have more power, more understanding of how it works, more, you know, support from team other than labels, all the stuff we talked about. So no need to come back on it. But yeah, the era of the creator, but also, as Moses said, because of technology, and we've seen it in lockdown, some of the radio example, but there has been some more, you know, new platforms like Patreon and Twitch, etc. It's all in favor of the creator and how for them to really own that place more than ever before.
Yeah, I really hope that there's also like a shift in how much we value like the creatives in our society, and, you know, and that comes with like financial support as well, and maybe looking at how we pay people, what support there is. You know, when you look at other countries, there definitely, you know, needs to be a shift for us, I think, here, in how we're valued in our society. So I hope that will come from it as well.
The business model of the current business model of streaming revenue cannot go like this for another 10 years.
Yeah.
It will have to change, and, you know, the industry knows it, and it's being talked everywhere about this. But it will change, and whether it be great or just a slight improvement, that's still to be seen. But it will have to change.
Kevin, what do the 20s look like for you?
Well, hopefully the honest, courageous artist. That's me being maybe idealistic. Eric is in a much better position than me to talk about the business side of it. But I think the artists who are willing to go out there on a limb, they're the ones who are gonna matter and who are gonna be remembered.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to end it there, even though I've got questions on live music. I've got questions on so many questions about social politics and social justice, and how we start to use music again, whether or not we feel like music has dropped some of its social justice ideals in the last few decades, and whether it's about to shift back, but we haven't got time. Thank you so much, Moses Boyd, Eric Karsenty, Sahra Gure, Kevin Legendre. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you for the last 2 hours and listen to all of your ideas and opinions around the world that you are working in. And I know that prospective students who are BA in music performance industry are going to find this hugely inspiring, and I hope that you will all continue to be a part of the course and a part of Trinity Laban, and I look forward to talking to you more.